A so-called Uygur Tribunal held hearings in London on allegations that China is committing genocide and other human rights abuses in Xinjiang. The self-proclaimed hearings took place from June the 4th to the 7th, and a second session is planned for September. The Chinese embassy in the UK lashed out at the move, saying it is just another anti-China farce concocted by a few individuals with the end goal of using Xinjiang to contain China. How does the so-called tribunal work? How credible is it, and what is its true purpose? Joining me today from Beijing is Victor Gao, Chair Professor at Soochow University, and from Zhongshan in southern China, Jerry Gray, a British-born Australian freelance writer who's been to Xinjiang 5 times since 2005. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. According to the official site of the so-called tribunal, it will be constituted as a UK private company limited by guarantee under the name of Uygur Administration. Mr. Gray, you worked in the UK for 10 years as a police officer. According to your experience, what exactly does it mean that it's a private company limited by guarantee? And what does it mean that it will be such an entity? What is it now?
It means that it probably doesn't exist on paper, and it will exist on paper as a form of company. That's really the nearest thing that you can describe. There is a dictionary, a legal dictionary called Curzon's Dictionary, and that defines a tribunal as being outside of the hierarchy of the courts, but with having an administrative or judicial function. But it doesn't mean that they have any laws. They're not allowed to pass any laws. They're not allowed to make any laws or actually have any function in the law. They're really just a process of gathering information.
Dr. Gao, does such a tribunal have any legal basis according to your knowledge? If not, why does it choose to call itself a Uygur Tribunal?
First of all, this so-called Uygur Tribunal is not a court of law. It does not have jurisdiction or justification or legitimacy or legality to operate as a court of law. It just uses the name tribunal, try to fool the rest of the world as to what exactly is happening in Xinjiang. As a matter of fact, if it is a court by any stretch of the imagination, it is a kangaroo court. Why? Because it is a court without justification, without legal background, without authorization. It's not part of the court system in any jurisdiction, and it wants to vilify China, to scandalize China, and to falsify the situation in China to achieve a particular purpose. That is to arouse indignation in the Western countries in particular against China based on the false accusations that they want to heap onto China. But I think they will be futile in their attempt because Xinjiang is part of China. No one can change that fact. And the Uyghur brothers and sisters are part of the Chinese nation. They are all Chinese citizens. They need to abide by Chinese laws. So we are united as a country, as a nation, against such so-called Uygur Tribunal operating illegally in London.
The company claims it has no state backing, Mr. Gray, and it's been referred to by some media in the West as a people's tribunal. Is it really a people's tribunal? And as the website suggests, an initial amount of around 115,000 US dollars came through the World Uyghur Congress, which Beijing classifies as an anti-China separatist organization with links to terrorism. And the World Uyghur Congress has received funding of around 1.3 million US dollars from the US National Endowment for Democracy from 2016 to 2019 alone. And we all know the connection between the National Endowment for Democracy with the US government. So under this context, how do you look at the impartiality or fairness of such a tribunal? Is it really independent as it claims to be?
It can't possibly be independent. If it was independent, it would have some witnesses to counterbalance an argument. We say everything that has happened in the 4 days of the tribunal has been anti-China, pro-Uyghur. And how can you balance that? Why is there no evidence at all? One other point of view, the evidence that is being offered is not credible evidence because The witnesses, the so-called witness testimonies, are not sworn affidavits. They're not sworn under any oath, or they simply are stories. And whilst I'm not going to say whether they're telling the truth or not telling the truth, without credible evidence, and there is a QC in charge of this, he knows what credible evidence means, and they're not offering any credible evidence at all. And they're not offering any counter evidence. So in order to prove something, you have to have a counter proof. You must have an argument against something to prove it, and they haven't done that. So I would just describe the whole thing as a headline-grabbing exercise. I think Dr. Gao's comment that it's a kangaroo court is right. It's not a pseudo court. It's not a quasi court. It's not any form of legal entity whatsoever. It's a paid-for promotion, like a public relations exercise. It's no court. It has no legality and no standings. It's for headlines only.
The company to be says it will be comprised of 9 United Kingdom-based jurors, however, including lawyers and human rights experts, and it plans to publish a report by the end of the year on whether or not there's been genocide in Xinjiang. How do you assess the impartiality of this company's findings, and how credible can the evidences be presented during these so-called hearings? Mr. Gray, what is your answer to these questions?
Well, I would take a look at one thing, which is the International Commission of Jurists, which has an office in Vienna. Their head office is in Austria. The International Commission of Jurists have never looked at Xinjiang. Now, if you want to have credible evidence, then you need credible people to give you that evidence. Now, people being paid, actors being paid, people being supported by the BBC, the NED, those kinds of players are not credible. The International Commission of Jurists, the International Criminal Court, all of these people have looked at Xinjiang and said, there's nothing to see here, let's move on. The International Commission of Jurists is quite unknown, but they are probably one of the most influential legal bodies in the world, the ICJ. And I've looked through their website, they have not got a single mention of Xinjiang in any of their press releases for the last 3 years. I think 2017 they had a mention, or 2016, about somebody winning a prize in Xinjiang, and it was a prize that they helped to contribute to. But apart from that, they have absolutely no comment to make about Xinjiang. Now, if this is the most world-renowned body of jurists who have no comment to make, then I would say there's nothing to be seen.
How seriously, if any, how seriously can these hearings be taken by members of the international community, especially the international legal community? For any trials surrounding genocide, the legal bar is very high, and it's a very long and serious process because you're dealing with a very serious accusation. For instance, if you really have to establish beyond doubt that there is an intention, there is an intent to destroy in part or in whole a population, will the so-called conclusion reached through such hearings carry any legal weight at all, Mr. Gary?
Okay, I think it's almost certain that the conclusion will be what we think the conclusion will be. That is, they will conclude that there is genocide or there is crimes against humanity taking place. That's what they will conclude. How much weight does this hold? With the legal fraternity, I would say almost every single person with legal training will look at this and say, it has no evidence, it has no weight, it has no body, there is nothing there. However, the newspapers, which is really what they're doing this for, will shout from the rooftops, and you will see every single Western newspaper, except for 1 or 2 independents, but every single Western newspaper will say this. And it's really the court of public opinion that's going to get the view, not the real legal system. The real legal system will say this is nothing, but they don't get the say. Nobody has ever asked me from a Western mainstream media what I think about it, because they're not interested in my side of the story. So this is the problem. It's only going to find what they want to find, because they've never asked anybody an alternate question. So the findings are definitely going to be, I can forecast this now. They will find that there is genocide going on. They will find that there are crimes against humanity. But can they prove those things? No, they can't. And anybody with legal training and legal understanding would accept that there is no crime, or there is no proof of a crime.
Let me go to Victor Gao here. In many media reports, however, the points about who backs the tribunal aren't really included, including where the money comes from. Many media seem to have blurred the fact that the so-called tribunal is simply not a court. For instance, the BBC said a series of hearings begins in London on Friday, aiming to gather evidence on whether the Chinese government's alleged human rights abuses in the Xinjiang region constitute a genocide. There you have the impression that these are real legal hearings. Or some other media reports, when they talk about this company to be, they say a people's tribunal. So what part have some media played in reporting, in shaping the public opinion the way we're seeing it?
Well, in recent months, some of the Western medias increasingly are allowing themselves to become instruments of anti-China, China bashing, and falsification of situation against China. They are not doing their job of objectively reporting the situation. They are not calling a spade a spade. They want to be instruments of lodging all these false accusations against China. In this particular case, as I mentioned, this tribunal definitely is not a tribunal of law. It is a kangaroo court. It does not have the justification or legal effect to operate as a tribunal. I hope someone in London, either a natural person or a legal person, will bring a lawsuit against this so-called tribunal, because it is stepping out of its authorities. It is operating as a false court, as a kangaroo court. It is bringing accusations not justified, not backed up by evidence. And media is not doing their job of verifying the situation, telling the real truth in an objective way. So I think these entities are debasing themselves in front of the whole world and allowing themselves to become instruments of China bashing and hostility against China. This does not bode well for Britain or for journalism in Britain or in quite a few other Western countries.
Many thanks to my guest, Victor Gao from Soochow University, and Jerry Gray, a freelance writer who's been to Xinjiang numerous times. Of course, we acknowledge there is the other side of the argument which is not presented here. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point.